Hey review family, keep it high, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, Review Guy, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one, I'm bringing you another list. We're just wrapping the year up with all these lists regarding music. And you've probably already seen the title. These are the albums that I wish I had reviewed in 2018 for one reason or another. This could be an album that just completely flew off the radar for me, and I found out about it later when it was kind of too late. I was caught up with other videos or other reviews I was doing. Maybe this was on the list, but it ended up getting bumped off in favor of something else. Either way, these are just the albums that didn't really make the cut. And also, one thing that I should point out is I've heard a lot of these now, either from start to finish or a little bit or bits and pieces. There are a few exceptions, and maybe I'll do some of these in Throwback Tuesday reviews. I already have plans on doing a couple of these, so let's get right into the video. First up, Daughters, You Won't Get What You Want. Yeah, this is a critically acclaimed album, and for good reason. I kind of kicked myself in the back that I didn't actually review this album because I can see clearly why it got so much praise and so much just admiration from music listeners, heavy metal and unheavy metal listeners, or non-heavy metal listeners. This really is a great noise rock / noise metal album, and I highly suggest it. There is a reason the reviews are rave. It is cacophonous, it's strange, it's an amalgamation of sounds. It is a very strange album from start to finish, and if you're looking for something a bit off the beaten path, a bit unfamiliar territory, then I highly suggest checking it out. Next up is Drake's album, Scorpion. Yeah, I did not cover this when it came out. This was one of the albums on this list that I just kept pushing back and back to the point to where I just didn't end up doing it at all. I did make a video about how it charted the Billboard Top 200 charts over and over and over, but for the most part, I didn't do anything covering this album. It didn't really fly under the radar. I heard a lot of the album. I haven't heard all of it because there's like 2 discs and it's a gigantic album. But I feel like I would have had a very lukewarm opinion of it if I had done a review of it. In other words, it wasn't really my thing. There were a couple hits, but nothing that was really blowing me out of the water. Next up is Harakiri for the Sky with Arson. I really wish I would have reviewed this because it's not gonna blow your socks off. It didn't really blow my socks off, but it is pretty interesting, and I don't know if it would have ended up on my end-year list or anything, but it definitely is my favorite album this year to come out of the whole kind of black gaze movement with the black metal and the post-metal and kind of some post-hardcore mixed in. Harakiri for the Sky is very interesting. Anyone that listens to their music knows they're kind of abstract, kind of off the beaten path as well, just like Daughters, very weird, and I highly suggest checking this album out. Next up, The Plot in You with DIspose. This is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, post-hardcore albums of the year. This, out of all of the albums on this list, would have gotten up very far on my end-year list, if probably top 10, if I just would have reviewed it. I did not get around to it in time. I did not review it in time. I definitely plan on doing a Throwback Tuesday review, so I'll save a lot of my thoughts for that. But let's just say that Rigged is one of my favorite tracks of the year, period. It's a really great track, and I love this album, but I will save it for a Throwback Tuesday review. Next up is Dummy Boy by 6ix9ine. Yeah, I know Tekashi is a douchebag. I know that he's been doing a bunch of stupid stuff, and I don't know what would have come of me reviewing this. I wouldn't have liked it. I've heard a lot of the tracks off of it. I haven't listened to it, but I just still think it would have been fun to review, just to kind of talk about the drama and talk about Tekashi as a person and the album for what it's worth. Next up is Alison's EP, The Lost Chapters. Yeah, I wish I had reviewed this just for one fact. I have not kept up to date with Alison. I have not heard many of their releases, but their 2010 album, The Emptiness, is one of my favorite concept albums of all time. I actually own it on physical copy, but I really do love The Emptiness. I think that it's a fantastic album. Whatever genre you want to categorize it as, it really is a great album, but I wish I would have checked out the EP. I don't know much about it, but this was something originally that I was supposed to listen to and do in a formal review, but I didn't get around to it. It got pushed off due to other releases that I wanted to do, but I still wish I would have went back and checked it out. I'm probably going to. Don't know if I'm going to do it in a Throwback Tuesday review, but I definitely wish I would have checked it out when it came out. Next up, Lil Xan, Total Xanarchy. I just wanted to take a massive doo-doo on this album. That's the only reason I wish I'd reviewed it. But at this point, music listeners all across the world unanimously have pretty much hated on Lil Xan, so there wouldn't have really been anything that had come out of it. It wouldn't have really done anything. It would have been a moot point, but still would have been fun. Next up is Amen by Rich Brian. Yeah, 88 Rising, people like Joji, people like Rich Brian. Wish I would have checked out this. I actually don't know a single song from this. I haven't checked it out, but this is an album that I've been really beating myself up about not checking out because 88 Rising really is a polarizing label. There's a lot of people on the label that are trying to do different things, but at the same time, people are kind of putting them down. Some people are saying this is like the new thing. This is part of the new wave. They're going to be like the up-and-comers. These are some of the biggest up-and-comers, and I would tend to agree with a lot of the popularity that people like Rich Brian and people like Joji, Frank Miller are obviously getting off of the 88 Rising label. I feel like it's a great label, and I really wish I would have checked this out. If nothing else but to see how this album turned out in its entirety, because usually Rich Brian isn't usually my thing, and Joji actually surprised me this year. If I remember correctly, I gave his album either a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. I think a 7 out of 10. Don't quote me on that. If it's like a 2 out of 10, then I'm sorry, but I really did enjoy that album, so I would have liked to see what happened. Next up is Jpegmafia's album, Veteran. I know a couple tracks from this. I wish I would have checked it out more because of like the experimentation. I know it's kind of like Earl Sweatshirt's new album, some rap songs, and I know it's not exactly like that, but what I mean is the kind of experimentation, kind of off the beaten path rap music that Jpegmafia is creating, as well as a lot of other artists, so I really wish I would have checked this album out. Next up is Migos with Culture 2. I'm sad I didn't do this because I wish I could have taken a steaming dump on it just like I did Quavo's solo album. I hate the Migos so much, I'm sorry. It just would have been a fun review in my opinion. Next up is Obscura's album, Dilivium. Yeah, I wish I would have reviewed this just because I think it would have been interesting to see how Obscura does because they're usually surprisingly not my cup of tea. I know they have the kind of death metal technicality, progressive metal influences, but I still usually am not able to get into them, but I know they get recommended a lot to me personally in the groups that I'm in for metal, so I really think that I probably should look more into it. Next up is Suicidal Tendencies with Still Psychopunk after all these years. There's not much to say about this. I just would have liked to check into this, kind of get some crossover thrash, because there's not nearly enough music being made in that genre nowadays, so I think it would have been cool to see what Suicidal Tendencies is doing, because they're kind of one of the like spearheading leaders of the genre back when it came about in the 80s, when thrash metal was coming about, and there was some punk being thrown into it, some kind of hardcore punk, and I would just like to see, after all these years, if they're still psychopunk. One of the big boys, Behemoth with I Loved You at Your Darkest. I am not a Behemoth fan. I'll straight up say that Behemoth is not a band that I'm a big fan of. I'm not a big fan of black and death metal for the most part. There's very few bands, if any, that come to mind that I like from that genre, and I don't find them as critically acclaimed as a lot of people do, and I'm not someone that swears by their early material, because I know a lot of people that hate on their newer material talk about how great their older material is. But honestly, but in my opinion, Behemoth isn't really my type of band. It's not a band that I can really get into that much, so if I would have reviewed it, I think it would have been a very lukewarm response. I don't think it would have ended up on like my end-year list. It probably would have gotten a very middle-of-the-road score from at least me, and I know a lot of people love this band and hold them dear in their hearts, and that's fine. They're just not for me. Next up is High on Fire with Electric Messiah. Love the concept behind this. Really great album. I highly suggest checking it out. Very sludgy and murky and interesting. I did listen to this album. I don't plan on doing a review for it or anything, but it still is a very interesting album, and I feel like at this point, a lot of people have listened to it, but if you haven't, I highly suggest listening to it. Next up is Aborted with Terrorvision. I did a video kind of mid-year about some of my most anticipated releases for, I believe, September and August, and this was one of them, and it was mostly for the cover art and the fact that Aborted had released some interesting technical death metal before, but I'm kind of glad I didn't, because this is an interesting album. It's gruesome, it's weird, but it's nothing that's gonna blow your mind in any way, in my opinion. It's very kind of middle of the road, meat and potatoes, cookie cutter death metal, especially technical death metal, and this is why a lot of people don't like the genre, because there's a lot of bands like this, and it's not a bad album. It probably would have gotten maybe like a 6 out of 10 or something for me, but it's nothing that's gonna blow you away in any way, and unless you're just a really big technical death metal fan that likes to hear a bunch of stuff from the genre, or if you're like a meat and potatoes fan of like Cannibal Corpse, stuff like that, kind of the more gruesome base level death metal, or if you just like Aborted, check it out. And then finally, Meek Mill with Championships. I just would have liked to see this album. I know it debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, and I've heard a couple tracks. I'm not sure if I would have like been in love with it or anything, or like it been the biggest defender of the world for it, but I mean, I kind of wish I had reviewed it, because there are some albums in the rap field that were big this year that I didn't get to, and that's just because I encompass a lot of genres on this channel, and Meek Mill was one of the really bigger things, kind of like Drake, that I just missed reviewing. Things like Jpegmafia, Meek Mill, Drake, Pusha T's album Daytona, which you could throw on this list, but I didn't really need or want to review that anyway, so let's get this over with. I think that's the end of the list. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. All of the links are going to be in the description below for like the outro music and how to subscribe to me, all that good stuff, in case you don't want to do it from the button. I like to include that. So I'll talk to you guys next time. But until then, my name is J Morse Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.
Oh no, what your mama gonna say when I tell her that I broke no more? The way that they used to be. Oh no, now you crying on the bathroom floor, then I guess it's the end. Well, I lost my mind and I lost my best friend.